Hi everyone, I'm Leticia Moraes, and I'm an academic coordinator at Cultura Inglesa São Paulo, responsible for mostly for the young learners and teens. And I'm also part of the committee for the IATEFL Young Learners and Teens Special Interest Group. And today I'm here to talk to you a little bit about cultural awareness and how we can work with that in the classroom and how we can promote cultural diversity. And before we delve into that matter, let me just tell you that during this webinar, I'll ask you some questions, and I'll want to hear, or not to hear, but to read your answers in the chat box. So feel free to type it away, all right? And okay, I have already told you that I am an academic coordinator. I work for Cultura Inglesa. I'm a member of an international teachers association. But there are other things that also define me, that go beyond my profession, right? And so, first of all, I'm a Brazilian person. So this has some impact on the way I deal with things. It has an impact on the kind of food I like, for example. And just to give an example, when I'm abroad, I guess the thing that I miss the most is rice and beans. And in England, I can't stand having their breakfast. I really miss our breakfast here, the way we have in Brazil. But on the other hand, I also have a very strong German influence in my life. Not that I have anything related to Germany in terms of family and such, but I studied in a German school and I've been learning German my whole life. So it did have an impact on my behavior as well. So for example, imagine, do you know when you leave the cinema in the shopping mall at midnight, there are just a handful of cars there and you're heading to the exit. What way do a Brazilian person usually take? The shortest one. What route do I take? I follow the arrows. I follow the path as if the parking lot was full. And most of that comes from this German bringing up, so to say, right? Apart from that, I also have a strong influence from the countryside and from a more mountain culture. So, for example, the other day I was in the countryside and I was going to give a training session, but in the middle of the way, my car broke down and it stuck. And what was my first reaction? It was to solve the problem myself and to get some leaves and so on in order to get the car moving. I didn't have the immediate reaction of calling the insurance company or calling someone to help me. And that's mostly because I used to do that as a kid, and for me that was just natural. So why am I telling all that? Just to exemplify that we are not characterized by a single culture. Sometimes, or I'd say most of the times, we have different cultures that define us, and that's just natural. So having cultural diversity in class is, I guess, the rule. It's not the exception. Even though here in Brazil we tend to teach more monolingual classes, Brazilian students. So in terms of the cultural variety from learners themselves, we could kind of assume that we are not that diverse. Indeed, we are. And it's also to exemplify that cultural diversity goes much beyond, and cultural awareness goes much beyond the difference between Brazilian people and the British and the American, this more stereotypical kind of relation. And that's going to be the focus of this webinar. So first of all, chat it away. So tell me, what kind of, how would you define the idea of cultural sensitivity, right? So which kind of keywords would you expect to find in a definition of what cultural sensitivity is? Feel free to chat it away. I want to see your contribution. Tolerance, okay. All right. Empathy, definitely. More ideas. Respect, yes, Alessandra. All right, so we have very important words here already, right? So tolerance, accepting, empathy, and respect. I'm going to show you now three, it's all right, Alessandra, three definitions of what intercultural or cultural sensitivity would be. And I want you to tell me which of the three best suit your own context. All right, so these are the definitions. Take a look. One and three, four. Sorry, I cannot see your name. Mariela, right? One and three. So, anyone who agrees with her? One is apparently the favorite. One and three. Apparently two is not very popular, right? And I'd say that the problem with two is that it's too generic, right? And what is very important about the first definition is this idea that there is no positive or negative, no better or worse, no right or wrong. And sometimes not assigning a value is more challenging than we might think, right? And I'll show you some examples to help us understand why this is not so easy to do, right? All right, so let's take a look at, I'll show you the beginning of a video, all right, by Julian, who is living in, he's not living, he's an expatriate, so he's not living in his country, and he will describe a moment when he suddenly realized that, and the impact that living abroad had on him. And he finishes with this question: why is this man talking to me? So pay attention to there at his account and try to understand, why did he ask this question? All right.
I was in Brussels. I was sitting on La Grande Place, which is a beautiful square in the center of town. Suddenly a man came and sat next to me and started talking to me. So I turned to him and I answered. Then I turned back and I asked myself, why is he talking to me?
All right. Any ideas of why he asked that? What was the problem of this guy approaching him and asking a question, a simple question? Anyone else had problems to hear that? Okay, I'll try playing that again.
I was in Brussels. I was sitting on La Grande Place, which is a beautiful square in the center of town. Suddenly a man came and sat next to me and started talking to me. So I turned to him and I answered. Then I turned back and I asked myself, why is he talking to me?
Could you hear now, guys? Okay, so why do you think he asked himself this question? So he was there in Brussels at this square. That's the picture of the square he's talking about, and the man started talking to him. So why is he talking to me? Why did he ask this question? What do you think? Ideas? Why it caught his attention that he was approached? Okay, so just for those who couldn't understand very well, in the beginning he just says that he's in Brussels, in the square, La Grande Place, and suddenly this man starts talking to him. And then comes the question, why is this man talking to me? So maybe he doesn't like talking to strangers. That's a possibility. Any other ideas? There's some people typing. Let's see what you have to say. Good point, Maya. All right. Doesn't feel very approachable. Okay. It's weird. Not from his culture. Okay, so I'll play his explanation of why this question bothered him a bit, right? Just for you to understand, he was in Brussels. He's from Canada, but he doesn't live in Brussels. Okay, so pay attention to what he says. If you can't understand very well, I can explain later as well. Okay? So don't worry.
Suddenly I realized, Julian, you're becoming Norwegian. So I turned to the man and I said, sorry, I live in a country where people don't speak to each other. The thing is in Norway is not that people don't speak to each other, it's that socialization takes part in a much more framed and organized manner.
Okay, so could you get? So he lives in Norway now, and in Norway, interaction takes place in a different way, right? So as he started explaining, it's more structured, right? And this has some impact on what to expect from people and what people give you, right? So he gives another example about how people interact and show interest. So he tells a story about when he and a friend of his were in Spain. They were visiting a winery, and there was a Spanish girl who was talking about the winery and the wine production. They were talking about the cava wine, and at some point, definitely Norwegian people would be shocked and real. And so at some point, this girl who was so excited talking about what she does and what they do there and about their own culture in a way. She stops, she shakes him, and she asks that question: why is he not interested in what I'm saying? He's talking about Julian's friend, right? And what was the problem there, right? So Spanish people, they are very hot-blooded in a way. So she got really irritated by his lack of response. And then Julian explains that the problem is that Norwegian don't show their emotions in the same way Spanish people do. So they would have happy, sad, angry, and drunk. So you wouldn't see the emotional feedback. So they wouldn't show what they're feeling and how they are, what their opinion about what's being said is. So, and this really bothered this Spanish girl, right? So, and that's the when cultural conflict can emerge. So they have different ways of dealing with the same thing, and they expect the other to interact in the same way. And then sometimes if you don't know that the other culture is different, you think that there's something wrong, right? Can you think about any other example in which this kind of cultural difference could cause some kind of conflict? If so, please type it away. Let's see what you have to say. Yeah, so it's very common, this relation of these misunderstandings related to flirting. There is even a song by a German band in which talks about a girl. In fact, she's French and she lives in Germany, and she can't understand. She thinks that the German guys, the German boys don't like her, when in fact they do, but they show this interest in a different way, right? So it's pretty much in the same line, right? Yes, the way when you greet people, when you introduce them, this can cause some kind of conflict, but this is more, let's say, famous. People are usually more aware that these things can be different, but it definitely can cause some kind of conflict there. Yeah, hugs and kisses as well, not only hugs. The name of the song is Aurélie. I'll type for you. This is the name of the song, and this is the name of the band. It's in German, all right? So if you know German, you're going to enjoy that. Why was that a challenge, Louise? In what sense it was a challenge for you, teaching Eastern people? Yeah, but it was good that the Russian girls clarified that they don't do that. This is really positive, because then, okay, you don't do that, then you can start some kind of understanding there. see. If I have any other. Yeah, that's true. That's true. So I'm going to show you now a different example that Julian himself gives. I'm going to show two more examples from this talk. I'm not going to play that because apparently not everybody was able to follow very well, but I'll talk about that for you, all right? So take a look at these two images, okay? So we have two different ways of approaching ordering drinks at a pub, right? So what do you think, in your opinion, what do you think these two images show about their different cultures? Chat it away, type it away. Let's see your opinions. Alison is typing. Okay, partnership. In what sense partnership? Guys. Socializing, but how different they are and where does this come from? What do you think? Okay. Let's see if we have more ideas. Act like a group, they didn't interact. Yeah, so what Julian explains and what he tried to show with these images is that in the first picture, where each one ordered their own beer, these people are probably from the kind of culture where you are raised to be independent. So you shouldn't depend on people, and you should be able to defend yourself, to find the solutions for the problems yourself. You should be self-sufficient. Then you go there and you order the beer yourself because you're self-sufficient. Whereas in the second picture, in the second image, what we tried to show is that this is a culture where people are raised to live, to build things together. So their strength comes from the group, whereas in the first one, each individual should have their own strength. And in that way, there are two different ways of seeing life, of facing the challenges that life poses, and they have impact on the way people behave. All right. Yeah, in England that's the case. In England, sometimes people think that no, they have to go to the counter, so they order their own beer, but that's what happens, right? So they go to the counter and they get beer for, they buy the round for those who are with them. So sometimes there is some kind of misconception there. So this is a very interesting effect of the way people are raised in their behavior, and it doesn't affect other people, but it can be misinterpreted. So we can look at the first image and say they're individualistic, so and not that they want to be self-sufficient. Whereas in the second one, you can look and say they depend on people for everything instead of being they build their strength together. So if you're not aware of where things come from, we can have these misunderstandings. And I want to show the last example because I guess this one is going to be very emblematic. take a look at this image. This is a bus stop, right? And how many people do you think would still be able to sit there? What do you think? Two, three, two. Yes. For our culture, definitely 2, 3. And depending on the case, maybe even more, right? Like 4 and so on. And depending on how many people there are at bus stop, it would vary. But as Julian explains, in Norway, this bus stop is full. So no one would sit there in between them, because their personal space is very different from ours. So for them, that's enough. And the next one would stand, keeping us more or less the same distance from the next and the next and the next, so they don't get too close to each other. And what would happen if someone sat there unaware of this cultural characteristic? This cultural characteristic of this imaginary bubble, as Andrea said, right? Probably what would happen is that one of them would stand up. And if this person stands up just because of the imaginary bubble, this can cause a serious misunderstanding. Because if the person who sat in the middle is not aware that they need all this space, they may think that the other person stood up because of something personal. So imagine that this person is from a different ethnic. So it could be prejudice against that. Imagine that this person is wearing any kind of religious symbol. It could be religious prejudice. So if the person who sat there is not aware of the culture in that place, they may feel even attacked and offended by a reaction that's just natural for that particular culture. And that's why it's so important to be culturally aware of things. So you need to know what happens, right? And in order to try to understand this movement from not knowing anything to really being able to integrate another culture in their own, from denial to integration, that's the title of the webinar, I got from the work of Milton a classification of different stages in cultural awareness, this cultural sensitivity, right? So take a look. So the first moment would be the denial. So the person would deny any kind of difference. So people are not different, they're the same, right? The next one would be defense. So they know that there are differences, but they don't like the differences. They demonize these differences. After defense, moving on, there's the minimization. So they don't demonize differences anymore, but they trivialize them. So they remove the importance of the difference. And after the minimization, we'll have the acceptance. And then you're more neutral. You have a more neutral attitude towards the difference. After acceptance, then adaptation. So difference is then seen as something positive. And then finally, integration. So when you can accept, more than just accept and just adapt, you know how to move from one culture to the other without losing your own culture, right? So as you can see, moving and becoming more cultural aware is not an easy and simple process. It has different steps, and going little by little can help us go further. So we cannot expect a person that until yesterday denied any kind of difference to accept them totally on the following day. So they will get there, but there should be a process into getting there. Okay? And I'll show you now some characteristics of some of these stages, of these steps. And I'll show you one by one, and then I want you to type there, what do you think, which stage do you think this is in their cultural sensitivity development, okay? So this is the first. So I repeated the stages on top for you to remember, and take a look. Which stage do you think this is? Which one? Adaptation or integration? Just one of them. Which one? Adaptation, integration. So which, this is the description of a person in one of these stages of cultural sensitivity. So which stage is that? Adaptation. Let me show you then, right? It's in fact integration already, okay? Because it's something that you do effortlessly. So you can switch styles according to the person you're talking to or the culture you're interacting with. So you do that seamlessly without any visible effort, just naturally. And that would be the total integration. Okay. So let's take a look at the next one. This one is a bit longer, so take your time to read. So which stage does this represent? You know that's not integration. So minimization. Let's say, yeah, minimization. That's it, right? So you know that the difference is there. You feel threatened by them, but then how do you react to this threat? You minimize it. Oh, we're not that different. We are all human beings, or something like that. So you understand that this exists, but not that important, and so on. That's the way you deal with that. Okay. Then let's take a look at the next one. Which one do you think this is? Denial. Everyone goes for denial. Apparently, right? So that's it. Denial. So you don't see the difference. Sometimes when we see the description, we think, this doesn't happen in this globalized world we live in. It's very different, very difficult to say no, this doesn't exist. But in fact, the beginning of at the beginning of the year, I attended a talk by a National Geographic photographer, and he was talking about very different cultures from around the world. And then when he started talking about some cultures where they would burn their skin to get some marks and the meaning those marks had on their arms, and then you start to think that's not possible. This doesn't exist. Does it really? Another example he gave is from a culture where you would chop off a finger when a close relative dies. So you would know how many close relatives you missed in your life by counting your fingers. So, or the lack of fingers, how many were chopped off. So when you see that, and then you see, okay, this exists and this happens, and sometimes you look and say, okay, you're talking about mutilation. Sometimes, depending, it's very hard not to add any value. Remember that in the beginning of the webinar, I mentioned that sometimes it's hard not to add any value to when you talk about culture. This is an example, right? So we look and say, chopping off fingers is denying this other culture. And then how can we balance something that's so different from us, and sometimes gets in conflict with our own culture and our own beliefs? So that's where denial comes from. If you think of more mainstream Latin cultures, more well-known cultures, this probably won't happen so often. But if you think about things that are not so well known, this definitely happens. Right? Let's take a look at the next one, next stage. Which one do you think this is? Defense. Now we have different opinions. So we have defense, we have acceptance. Acceptance. Let's see, different opinions. Acceptance. Yes, that's acceptance. So here, you know, say, okay, yeah, we're different. We have already passed the denial. We're not minimizing the differences anymore. We're not saying, in the end, we're all human beings. We're not doing that. But so we accept that there are differences. They're generally different. That's inevitable. That's part of life. People are different. We are not threatened by them anymore. But that's my culture. That's your culture. So there's no adoption of or adaptation of any kind. So you're tolerant. You have a more sympathetic attitude. So these were keywords that you mentioned in the beginning of the webinar. So you're already accepting, but I am me, that's me, that's them. There is still this difference, but that's neutral. Here you're not adding so much value to the difference, right? Here you are accepting more, but you can, as we saw with adaptation and integration, we can be more sensitive to the cultural differences by knowing how to use them when you're interacting with different cultures. So thinking of Julian's example, so knowing that in Norway we shouldn't sit at bus stop. So that was full. So we know you're aware of that, you accept that, and then if you adapt, you don't sit there, for example. All right. Let's see one more. Which one do you think this is? Let's see. Defend. That's it. That's defend. So now we can have a better idea of this continuum, right? So we start with, this is not a culture, this doesn't exist, this is not possible, that's simply wrong, to I don't like it. Okay, that exists, that's a different culture, but I don't like it. I don't want to have anything to do with that. And because mostly feel threatened by that, right? And there's lots of judgment there. So you see the other culture as inferior. So think about the cutting their fingers off. It's very easy to think that that's inferior. That's a kind of thought that can cross our mind very easily, because it's so different, and because we are usually not aware of this kind of culture. So we first deny, then we accept, but we're not happy about it. Then when we minimize, okay, we are different, but we are all human beings deep inside. And then we accept, okay, we're different, the difference exists, and that's positive, that's okay, I have no problem with that. And then you say, okay, I can adapt, I can incorporate one and other things, and then with the integration, you would go to really incorporating and moving from one culture to the other seamlessly, right? So take a look at this one. Which one is this? This is the last one, all right? Integration. Everybody with integration. Be careful, right? It's in fact adaptation, because here you integrate aspects of the other culture in it, but you don't give up your own culture. Just integrate some things. But remember, let me go back to the integration one. Just find it here. Take a look. It's stronger than that. You're really bicultural. You don't integrate just one or other thing. You know when to use this or that, and with whom and how. So it's deeper than the adaptation. All right, so this is the integration. And let me go back to the adaptation. This is the adaptation. Right, so it's when you start changing your behavior. Integration, your behavior has already, these changes are consolidated. Right? Okay, so we have all these 6 stages, but being aware of them helps us understand maybe students' attitude to some things and to each other sometimes. So by knowing them, if you have different cultures going on in the classroom, and by different cultures it could be even religious things. So if you have people who are from Muslim in the classroom together with a Catholic, depending on where they are in their cultural sensitivity or how aware they are of each other's culture, different conflicts may arise. And by having an idea of these kind of differences, of these stages, can help us deal with that. But how can we help learners move from one stage to the other? How can we help them develop this sensitivity? So there are some hints and some ideas on how to deal with that. So take a look at this slide. So we can have a process. So from denial to defense, defense to minimization, minimization to acceptance, acceptance to adaptation, adaptation to integration. As I said before, it has to be step by step. You cannot go from denial to integration. This is not going to happen, right? So here I have some ideas on how, on the right, I have some ideas on how to deal with that. So can take a moment, read them carefully, and try to match. So which one would be denial to defense? Would it be depolarizing negative judgment, introducing the positive aspect of common aspects to all cultures, the similarities, grasping the importance of cultural difference? So what would help learners go from denial to defense from these options on the right? Take your moment to read them. Okay, so which idea would help, do you think, would help students go from denial to defense? Phenomenal typing, CO2, awareness of this difference, grasping. Yeah, the very first step is the awareness of difference. Because in the denial, sometimes you don't even know that the difference exists. So just like the Spanish girl didn't know that the Norwegian guy wouldn't show any kind of facial reaction. So she wasn't aware. So the first step is saying, okay, it's different. This difference exists. All right. And now think about defense to minimization. Which of these do you think would help students go from defense to minimization? Feel free to type it away in the chat box. If you want to type just the first words from from the idea, it's all right. Polarizing negative judgment. Okay, so let's take a look. Exactly, Fernanda. Because remember that when you are in the defense stage, you still demonize the other culture, right? So if you are there, if you're already aware of the difference, but you still think that the other is wrong, we have to change this idea of right and wrong, positive and negative, to show that there are indeed similarities. So, okay, it's different, but is it that different? So you start moving towards more understanding in that sense. So if we're talking about religion, for example, it can go from he's wrong, I have the right opinion, this is the right religion, to okay, but they're all religions, so you all believe in God, so you can go through that direction. And talking about religions can be something very difficult in the classroom, because it's usually arises very strong reactions. People are very emotive and passionate about it. It's something very important in their own culture. So showing that there's also similarities is a very important step, right? So in that transition, let's say. Let's take a look now at minimization to acceptance. Which one do you think is going to move from, help students go from minimization to acceptance? What do you think? Ideas. Let's see. We know that's not the polarizing negative judgment and an awareness of difference. Yeah, grasping the let's take a look. Grasping the importance of cultural difference. Very good. Because remember, minimization, you're saying, we are not the difference. There are also similarities. But when you go to acceptance, you accept that there are differences and the differences are okay. So what's the importance of having these differences? How richer life is going to be, or how richer the interactions in the classroom is going to be. And sometimes here, this acceptance can also be for their own culture, because depending on your culture, depending on the, sometimes people would demonize their own cultures when they start to know other realities. So have you ever had that kind of student who say that everything from the United States is perfect and everything from Brazil is wrong or doesn't work or something like that? This is a moment to raise their awareness of the importance of their own culture. It's not only the other culture that matters. Your own has also positive things. And if you come to think, this cultural difference can also come from cultural background within the country. It can be even a social difference because of their own experiences. If you have a group with learners who don't have the opportunity of traveling much, and one group doesn't have this opportunity, the other group has, and they have lots of things to say and to share, Sometimes the group that doesn't travel that often or can't travel doesn't have sometimes the financial conditions to travel. They may feel that they're not as important. But then again, what can you bring from that? How can you show that, okay, we are all different, but look, there's nothing wrong not traveling. It's also important to know the things that happen here in your city, in your neighborhood, in your area of the city. So this the movement that can also happen, right? So we went for deny to defense, defense to minimization, minimization to acceptance. Let's see how we can go from acceptance to adaptation. All right. Take a look. Which one do you think would go from acceptance to adaptation? What do you think? Yes. See, so starting. Anything that favors the development. This one is also typing. Do you agree with Silvia, Alessandra? See. Okay, so let's take a look. Anything that favors. In fact, it is encouraging intensive exploration and research. And why is that? Because remember that from when you accept the other culture, you understand the positive things, the importance of that culture, but you don't adopt any behaviors. You don't start the process of change. In order to be able to start this process, you need to understand this other culture in more depth. If you don't have a deeper understanding or a deeper knowledge of that culture, it's going to be really hard to actually incorporate things and go beyond the stereotypical behavior, right? So that's why encouraging intense exploration and research would help acceptance. Students go from acceptance to adaptation. So they need to learn more, understand more the other culture, right? And okay, the last one then is anything that favors the development of empathy with other cultures, as well as the ability to communicate interculturally, right? So you already know a lot about that culture, but then you have to develop this ability to communicate interculturally. So that's the key here to the integration, is this ability. And that's, I'd say, it's really hard to actually develop, not to actually develop, to reach that point. You can see it's a long process, right? And sometimes, depending on the context where you teach, moving from denial to defense is already a huge step being taken towards a more tolerant and understanding world, as you mentioned in the beginning, right? And but how can we, where can we put these elements in the lesson? Where can we raise their awareness of difference? Where can we help them notice the similarities? How can we help them notice the importance of cultural difference? In what moment of the lesson? Well, basically, it can be at any point of the lesson. It depends on what happens in the group. It depends on the mix of people you have. It depends on what comes from them. So, for example, you can work with that with a reading activity during the pre-reading. It can be during the post-reading. It can be even during practice of language. It can be when you notice that, for example, because we don't have different genders in English. For example, we have he and she, but you don't have they is the same for both of them. So this has an impact on the way they behave. And when it comes to things that nowadays we tend to use more neutral, gender-neutral words like a police officer, for example. This is something that can be done during the practice moment. You're practicing professions, and then you tackle that difference in terms of culture. So you don't you favor the use of new gender-neutral words, professions, instead of using policeman and policewoman. You go now for police officer. So what's the point of doing that? So depending on where the learners are in terms of their sensitivity, you can deal with that in different ways, right? So I came up with some questions that can help us think about the lesson and where we can incorporate these cultural aspects, right? So some questions that we can ask after you have planned the lesson that can help us analyze how culture is being tackled in that particular lesson. So we can ask if there was any cultural gain, and the cultural gain, the kind of cultural gain, will depend a lot on the group, on where they are, on what they already know. And as well, is there linguistic gain? So after all, culture and language, they are pretty much connected. We cannot set them apart. As someone mentioned, typed that in the chat box in the beginning of the webinar. But we cannot forget that in the end we are teaching English. So we are teaching culture via English. So the linguistic gain is also important. And which elements in the lesson contribute to promote students' cultural sensitivity? Or are there any? Is there any room? So sometimes taking a look at your plan for the lesson after it's ready can help you identify, okay, but maybe here I could exploit this and that aspect because my students think like this, and that. But of course, we can't forget that sometimes these kind of things will emerge during the lesson in a natural way. So we can address them. So sometimes you plan something for something, and during the lesson you notice that they are sometimes much more culturally aware than you expected. Then you have to change a little bit how you deal. We're not raising the awareness. You're already showing the importance of something. So then you shift a little bit how you work with that depending on what emerges from the lesson, right? And this can help you actually deal with cultural issues in the classroom. That's something that I'd say that the world needs nowadays. The world needs more tolerance, and especially if we consider the social media, it's very easy to get stuck into one way of thinking. So this kind of work can help you open their students' minds to other opinions as well. So this kind of work can help you develop them as citizens, not only as English speakers, right? So I don't know if you have any questions about it. I'll type here the name of the author and the name of the book on which I based. I took these ideas from, okay, is Milton J. Bennett. I'll have here for you. Just a second. And one of his main works is called Towards Ethno-Relativism. Is the name of the book. This is where I took these ideas from. Okay, I don't know, Thais, I don't know about the participation certificate. I actually don't know. Do you have any questions about the content of the webinar? Okay, everyone's typing. Okay, Thais. Any questions? Okay. Okay, so I guess no questions. So I wanted to thank you all for being here with me tonight. And these are my emails if you wish to get in touch and talk about that or other things related to teenagers. That's my area of expertise. And thank you very much. And see you the next time. All right? Thank you. Bye-bye.